The idea of this external measures of validation being unfulfilling, there has to be a replacement. Moving the house from the sand onto the rock, there has to be a total life replacement. Now, this is probably one of the most painful thing emotionally a person will do, is to realize I'm building my house on sand. I am building a false construct. My whole life has been based on chasing this dream of success or fame or fortune, of retirement at a certain age, and to realize it's like that's never going to give me life. To redefine what is life is the starting place, I believe. To redefine what is life. Life is not fame, it's love. Life is not power, it's generosity. Life is not selfish, it's giving it myself away. Life is not Facebook likes, it's friendship, the people that I really like and they like me. There's an intimacy in relationship, and so there's this tearing down that takes place first. And I believe people have to go through an emotional and a validation detox, is I guess I might call it that.
Validation is an enormous part of our lives. It's an external recognition that the feelings we have or the actions we take are worthwhile. Community, as God intended it, often encourages people towards right living through validation. However, the desire for external validation can quickly become all-consuming and unhealthy. How many social media followers do you have? Do you have a fulfilling marriage? Are your children successful? How many parties are you invited to? This week, Gary Wilkerson discusses how easily we slip into searching for worth in things other than God. Only God can validate our existence. Only He can give our lives real purpose and direction. Now here's our host, Bob Dimmer.
Well, welcome to another Gary Wilkerson podcast, and we hope these podcasts are blessing you and you're finding the topics interesting and useful as well. And if you are, I hope you get in touch with us. So you'll see some contact information on the screen if you're watching on YouTube, and we'll also have it in our show notes if you're listening audio-wise. But we'd like to hear from you, what you think about the podcast and how you feel about them. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover, we'd like to hear from you as well. Of something that you've been wondering about and would like to hear Gary comment on, please do contact us. But we are hoping that you're finding these useful. And I think today's topic is also one that people will find beneficial as well. And that's the broad topic of well-being. What does it mean to have well-being? If you were to look it up in the dictionary, well-being is defined as the state of being comfortable, healthy, or happy. I was doing some research this week as we were getting ready for this podcast, and I see that there are studies on well-being, as there are studies on everything, studies on happiness in particular. In fact, the United Nations' latest World Happiness Report came out not too long ago, and they ranked countries. The U.S., Gary, may not be too surprised to hear, we're 18th on the list, which is kind of interesting. We have the pursuit of happiness and our Declaration of Independence, but it appears we're not all that happy in terms of the rest of the world. Why do you think that is? And it seems to be slipping. Why do you think those two things are coming together?
Those are great questions. I think to get to the good news of living a holistic life that is the life you were meant to live, the life that God has designed for you, to get to that good news of the gospel, sometimes you have to start with the negative. And I don't like to go negative. I'm a pretty positive guy, but I think we start off with the sort of really getting to the grassroots of this thing, to the core of this. I think we would see what Soren Kierkegaard called it existential dread. It's a dread of life that is not based on, my job's not going well, or I wish my marriage was better. It's something deep inside the soul that has this almost nebulous sense of something's missing. There's got, you hear this a lot, don't you? Like people will confess to us in ministry like this. I just feel like there's something more to life. There's something missing. I have this high expectation of what life could be like. And especially as you become a Christian, you get these, the Bible calls them precious promises of God, but yet the reality of our life sometimes is much lower than that. And so that's what Kierkegaard called the existential dread. It's an angst of soul. So that sounds kind of rough. It's the opposite of joy or peace or contentment or happiness. As far as why America particularly might be suffering with this is because our expectations are so high, the gap is wider. So, and I'm not saying high expectations are bad, but I am saying that we have high expectations and oftentimes a very low reality, and that gap, it's a glaring gap that causes this angst, this dread that I'm talking about, and so and that's what our ministry is about, is we even call it helping people live a better life and make a better world, is that you might be whole, spirit, soul, and body. And sometimes something is out of a line. Your spirit, you might go to church and pray and read your Bible and feel close and intimate with God, but your body be out of shape and you're eating poorly, and so there's a disconnect there, or the soul, which we define the soul mostly as our mind, the things our thought life, our will, what we choose to do, and our emotions, how we feel about things. And sometimes people can have a strong will, and they're going to do what they're called to do, but they're feeling just bad about life. Or others they're emotional, but they don't have a very strong will, so they never accomplish the things they want to. And so getting all this aligned together is I believe, what God is after in our life.
I know when we're talking about the non-believers, it's easy to say that emptiness is that God-shaped hole in your life that you don't have, right? But it seems like for the believer, probably much of our audience that are listening to this podcast, it sounds like they're a little bit out of whack, as you just described, or maybe we have you say high expectations, maybe it's high entitlement that maybe we should have.
Entitlement's a better word. Yeah. I think entitlement's a better word than expectation. That's, and we could do a whole podcast show on the entitlement culture and the harm that it's doing today. But as far as relating this topic of wellness, of well-being and holistic living in Christ, if we hone that down to speak about it, well, how does that work relationally? Because there's no one's whole and living to the fullness of the expectations that they want without it being relational. So, let's look at it from the negative again. Every sin in the Bible is a relational sin. Even the Ten Commandments, the first six have to deal with vertical relationships with other people. I got it backwards. The first four are relationship towards God. Have no other God before me. Don't take my name in vain. And then the other six are relational, around community and stuff, and then you take that all the way through to even the New Testament, and every sin that's mentioned, greed, pride, lust, anger, strife, division, it's all relational. And so sin is, I think, we define it, you've heard this before, right, as missing the mark. Well, if all sin is relational, then sin is missing the core, the target of the relationship that God wants us to have. And so for all have sinned, we miss the relational target and fallen short of the glory of God. We're falling far short of the relationship capacity that God has put within us. And we feel that. And that's, I think, where that dread comes from, that angst. It's like, or that sense of something is missing in my life. And we look at external measures to say, this is what's going to fill me. So there's an emptiness, there's a hurt, there's a wound inside my heart and yours, all of us. It may have come from an abusive situation in childhood. It may come through a divorce. It may have come through an addiction in our life. And so we sense this woundedness, this brokenness in us, this sorrow, this grief. And so we build these external measures. And what I mean by that is, okay, so let's say, and this, I'm not saying this, but let's say somebody grows up and they just never get a sense of being loved. Their father never once said to them, I love you, or took somebody in their arms. And so there's this woundedness inside. And out of that comes a sense of, there must be something wrong with me. There's I am incomplete. I am defective because, and what we do is we try to build a reason why we got wounded, a reason why we got hurt. We don't like to blame other people sometimes, and so we start blaming ourselves. Oh, the reason my father rejected me, the reason my mother left me, the reason my marriage fell apart is because I am insignificant, or I am unworthy, or I am unlovable. I lack intelligence. I'm not smart enough to, I'm not good looking enough. We have all these measures that we say, if I had those things, then I would get the love that I'm looking for. Then I wouldn't have the dread or the angst of soul. Then my life would be holistic or complete. And so we're looking for external measures. It might be money. Once I make my first million, everybody's going to love me, and I'm going to live this holistic, happy life. Or when I get to this particular place on the corporate ladder, once I get to this level, then I'm going to be happy. Then I won't have to describe myself as I am defective because I am I'm lacking intelligence. I will prove myself to have intelligence by climbing the corporate ladder. So we build these, I call them false constructs. It's like you're building a whole life, and it's so sad. We don't even know it. We're not aware of it, but we're building our whole life based out of our wounds. And I guess I could say wounds speak. They have a subconscious voice, and they tell us, go get that. A guy who feels insecure about his masculinity might chase women. And so there's that false construct. If I get this victory here, that'll prove. And it's very subtle, but it's very powerful. As a pastor, I speak to pastors all over the world. I think pastors have a strong problem with external measures. If the church reaches 500, then I'll be happy and I'll be a success. If it reaches, then it gets to 500. And what do they say? Like, well, when it gets 1,000, or when we get the new building, or when the budget reaches this much. And so there's budgets and buildings and numerical. So there's a lot of numerical numbers, And I'm not above this. We just started this podcast 6 weeks ago or so, and a couple months ago. And I look online, I see how many viewers we have, and I see the idolatry in that, because if it's a podcast that gets more views than that, I'm real happy. It's like that's an external measure and so I repent. I say, God, that's not what gives me life. I want life from something much deeper than fame or notoriety, and that's the whole Facebook thing of how many followers you have or how many likes you get on something, or the Twitter, or there's actually a psychological thing. They're thinking about putting it now in they call it the DMS, the disorders, and it's called social media validation, and people will actually get depressed because they compare their following to somebody else, or they have this false sense of pride and arrogance of I have more than you, and so it's a relational sin again, and it all goes back to that. So it starts with so. To stop, if you just tell me stop looking for external measures of validation, God doesn't want you to do that. I go like, okay, good luck with that. I don't think you're going to get there that way. I think you have to realize that sense of need, constructing a life that trying to get you to get that, comes from something. It's powered by something, and I believe it's these wounds that we have in our heart, the sense of lack of. I'm broken, and this will fix it, and it never does. It never brings the solution. The solutions are very different.
It's interesting. It's almost the opposite of living holistically, because you're going after one thing rather than the holistic way to live, which would make everything better.
Yeah.
So what is that? Is it the money? Is it the fame? Whatever it is, it's just one thing that we're after.
Right. Yeah. It's one thing, or maybe one or two. We think that, and that's the false construct that I'm talking about. So we build this house on the sand that's built of money, or that's built of fame, or that's built of corporate success, or that's built of applause because you do something and people give you a pat on the back, and so that gives you that sense. And it never fulfills. It's never, as we've heard said many times, it's never enough. It just doesn't. It doesn't meet the need, the deeper need of our heart.
Which it sounds like you're saying is relational, is that deeper need. And so if we have this lack of well-being, we're searching in the wrong places, how does it impact the very thing that we are after, which is the relationship? How does it impact our friends, our family, those around us?
Yeah, well, it impacts everything. Just, as we speak about sin being, every sin is a relational sin. On the opposite, every form of love is relational, or all obedience, all, I might say this way, all holiness. We talk about wanting to live holy, in holiness. Then I think all holiness is relational as well. Again, towards God, towards other people, living in good relationship with people. So and love fulfills the law. And so the idea of this external measures of validation being unfulfilling, there has to be a replacement, moving the house from the sand onto the rock. There has to be a total life replacement. Now, this is probably one of the most painful thing emotionally a person will do, is to realize I'm building my house on sand. I am building a false construct. My whole life has been based on chasing this dream of success or fame or fortune, of retirement at a certain age, and to realize it's like that's never going to give me life. To redefine what is life is the starting place, I believe. To redefine what is life. Life is not fame, it's love. Life is not power, it's generosity. Life is not selfish, it's giving it myself away. Life is not Facebook likes, it's friendship, the people that I really like and they like me. There's an intimacy in relationship, and so there's this tearing down that takes place first. And I believe people have to go through an emotional and a validation detox, is I guess I might call it that. I've worked with Teen Challenge my whole life, and they usually send somebody through detox because when you first stop doing something, that gives you a sense of the dopamine. So heroin will give you a dopamine high, and so you get addicted to it. Well, they've done studies, and so that's why people get addicted to social media, because if they get 5 likes, they go like, wow, that actually gives the brain a dopamine hit. And so if you're living your life for external measures of validation, you're going to have to go through detox. You're going to and for some people it's even like an addiction to, say, binge watching a television show. So I've noticed in some people that I counsel, when they talk about binge watching something, they will begin to talk about the TV show that they're binge watching as if it's their own community. There's a pseudo community that they're involved in, so they know what Joe and Marianne are doing and how their relationship's working, and Fred over there, he's bad, and they talk about it like it's their own community. Well, it's an external measure. It's getting it from another source, and so there comes a point in our life where if we're ever going to transition from the house on the sand to the house on the rock, if we're going to tear down the false construct and let God construct the life that He wants, the first measure is going to be this detox of saying, okay, I'm going to have to resist. So when you're a pastor, maybe you should stop having the ushers tell you how many people were in church on Sunday, because does that really matter? Maybe you just want to talk to one person and say, where's your soul? Where's your heart? What's God doing in your life? I'm not saying church growth's bad, but if your whole life is constructed around, once I build this success in the corporate world, then there has to be the sense of saying, that's not bad in the sense of wanting to do my job well and to get advancements, but if that's my measure of validation rather than this other thing, and so you'll never be happy with a false construct once you find out who you were meant to be. And you find out life is love, life is grace, life is generosity, life is forgiveness, life is community, life is togetherness, life is having close friends, life is having a gift inside of you that you give to the world. Whether it's 10,000 or 10 people is not as significant as having the gift and using it well for the glory of God. And again, that's one other ailment that in this external validation is the ailment of comparison. And so let's use social media again. So somebody has a social media platform and it reaches 1,000, and somebody has one that reaches 10,000. So the one with 1,000 starts feeling like, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough. Why is that person so much better than me? Why do you? And it even sometimes becomes an accusation against God. Why do you like them better than me? It's the Esau, Jacob. It's Esau saying like, oh, Jacob gets everything, and it's Cain and Abel as well. God said to Cain, hey, if you do well, all will go well with you too. Like you can have everything your brother can have, but it's not the external measures; it's the internal measures.
You mentioned replacing the house we're built on instead of the sand on the solid structures. You have to replace it with something. What are some good things that we can replace these bad habits with?
Well, once you detox and some of these bad things are no longer giving you life, once you take that, and I would also say face the hurt, like. So I'm detoxing from the like money being my external validation. So I'm detoxing from that. So I still want to get a good job and I still want to make money, but I'm not going to let that be my idol any longer. So you crush that idol, and then what happens then is if you're not careful, you'll replace it with some other addiction or idol. And so you have to face that. This is now you have to go. That's external. So now you have to go internal and say, okay, there's a reason I'm going after that. And if I don't face the reason, the core reason, if I don't face the root of this and just keep dealing with the fruit of this, then I'll just get new fruit, I'll get new problems. And so that, and again, that's what I said is painful, because you're going to the core of this, like, oh, okay, so the reason I want applause is because I feel so unworthy, like people don't love me, and so it's getting to the core of that. It's dealing with God. It's getting face to face with God. It's doing business with God. It's a come to Jesus kind of meeting, saying, Jesus, there's something wrong inside of me. There's a longing that's unmet. There's a sense of unworthiness. There's a sense of lack of value. There's a sense inside of me that I'm not good enough. I don't. No matter what I do, I just never feel like I've done enough. At the end of the day, I always feel like I'm just failing people. I'm letting people down. And the reason we live for these addictions of external measures is because that covers the pain. And so once you get rid of the event, the measures, then you're going to be left with the pain, and you have to go through that. That's the hard part. You have to face that pain, because that's what started the addictions. That's what started the need for the external measures of validation. And so once the validation's gone, or the need for it, then you're faced with the pain. So you're saying, like, oh, and I do this all the time. I want to be. The Bible says to examine yourself. So I look inside my own heart and say, is there something? Okay, I seem to be going after that idolatry. So what is it in my heart? What's the root of this thing? And it'll always come to a wound. Like, oh, I feel I'm not good enough. So if I'm not good enough, if I work really hard, if I do a perfect podcast today, then a lot of people will like it, and I'll feel really good about myself. Mm-hmm. Baloney. That's external. If I go inside, I just go like, you know what? Me and Bob are having a good talk, and if no one else listens to it, we'll enjoy each other's company, and God will be here in this room, and He's pleased with that. I don't need anything else. And so, but I have to go through that pain first of saying, oh, I'm looking for love in all the wrong places. I'm looking for validation because I'm feeling unworthy. So that's so the good news then, okay, now what do I do with that pain? That's where I have something that psychology doesn't have, that self-help doesn't have. I go to the source of love, the source of life, the source of grace, the source of forgiveness, the source of peace and joy and contentment, and I drink of that, and all of a sudden I start, I'm able to say to myself, not by looking in the mirror and chanting, I'm good enough, I'm handsome enough, I'm strong enough, but looking into the mirror of God's law and saying what God says about me, that He gives me unconditional love. That is love not based on my value or worth. And so I realize at the core of my pain, I am trying to get somebody to love me, somebody to accept me, somebody to value me. And now I realize the God of all creation, the God who calls this place His home, the earth is His footstool, that God says to me that I value you. You have worth in me. You were so valuable. I sent my son to die for you. That's how much I care about you, and that's the value that you have. So you don't have to go running and chasing after it. You don't have to go to what Jeremiah called broken cisterns, drinking muddy water, when you have rivers of living water of life. And so that's the replacement. If you don't get to this sense of finally be able to say, and this is such good news, I don't have to prove myself. I don't have to be more than I am. I don't have to put on a show, a mask. I don't have to get other people's validation by trying really hard. That's exhausting, and it's frustrating, and it leaves you, ultimately you will leave yourself feeling like a failure. Come to the source of rivers of living water, and He says you'll find abundant life. And what is that? It's like, I can breathe, and there's peace, and there's contentment, and the fear why people don't go there. It's so good. Why don't people go there? Well, there's a fear. If I just go for contentment and peace and joy, that's just like I'll just be real blunt with you, and I hope this doesn't sound sexist or anything like that. But for me, when I've wrestled with this, my external validation feels very masculine. I'm going to be successful, powerful, financially well off. A lot of people are going to like me. It feels really strong. peace, joy, contentment. It sounds very feminine to me. It's kind of like emotional, like mumbo jumbo. It's like, I don't want that. I want the power. I want the success. And so my whole life, I realized I've defined success incorrectly. I've defined it as these selfish, powerful, ambitious things, and it's not successful at all. If I define success, if I can get off that sand and onto the rock, I start defining success differently as being, I'm a man of love, I'm a man of grace, I'm a man of generosity, I'm a man of peace. I'm not only on a rock, but I'm becoming a rock. And so people now come to me because they're living in this world of clamor and angst and dread, and they're seeing a soul on a rock who has life and peace, and they're starting to say, how did you get that? Where'd that come from? Now that gives you real success. That isn't maybe an external measure of validation, but it's one that is inviting people to let the scaffolding of a life constructed on the sand, let it fall, let it be torn down, and come over to that rock and build your house on that rock. See, Jesus didn't just say, come to the rock and get saved. He said, build your house on it. And so you're constructing your life based on these biblical values, which are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, long-suffering, temperance. Against such there is no law. There's a law against greed and strife and selfish ambition, but there's not a law against these things. So it's a major turnaround, but it's well worth it. And it doesn't, Bob, I know you know this as well as I do. It doesn't happen by listening to one podcast or one sermon. It doesn't happen by going to hearing a sermon series at your church or sitting with a pastoral counselor for even a month. It's a journey of many, many months and years.
It's a whole paradigm shift.
It's a paradigm shift.
It's so countercultural too. I was watching one of your devotionals. By the way, for our listeners, we're going to start a video devotional that Gary is going to be doing. We'll be sending out once a week. And I was watching one yesterday that you did, and it was talking about how we don't seem to know the source of joy. We think hoard money. No, give it away. We think we want everything for ourselves. No, it's sacrifice. It's everything opposite of what we've been taught and what we think we know. Yeah. That is the source of real truth. You're right, that doesn't happen overnight. That would seem to take a lifetime to get that down.
Yeah, it does. It takes a lifetime, and it's a journey, and you got to enjoy the journey.
You've been listening to the Gary Wilkerson podcast. God created you in His image. He sent Jesus to die for you and redeem you. You are fearfully and wonderfully made and deeply loved by your Maker. Please trust in these promises as your validation today and each day after. They will grant you peace that lasts unlike anything the world can offer. Maybe you've had to miss a Sunday service or need some midweek encouragement. World Challenge has a full list of great video sermons along with downloadable audio versions from inspired preachers like David and Gary Wilkerson, Tim Delena, Carter Conlon, and others. These spiritual leaders cover topics ranging from achieving your wildest dreams to dealing with exhaustion or even how we should view eternity. This Gary Wilkerson podcast is brought to you by World Challenge. Sound design for this episode by Mike Hall-Smith. This episode was written by Rachel Schmitz. Our producer is Chris Wigington, with video production by Aaron Gale. We hope to see you next time on the Gary Wilkerson podcast. Until then, do all you can to live a better life and make a better world through Jesus Christ.